The room greets me like a sealed memory, light barely reaching the corners, dust drifting in slow, uncertain spirals as if unsure it should exist here at all. The air carries an untouched stillness, the kind found in places people avoid remembering. A faint trace of old paper lingers, brittle and weightless, the scent of years compressed into a single breath. The floorboards rest under a thin frost of ash-gray dust, mooting every step. Nothing moves. Nothing speaks. Time holds its breath around the outline of a forgotten life, waiting for someone to disturb it again. Waiting for me. The investigation reopens. The year is a long way from 1973, yet the door I push open feels anchored to that winter, unchanged, unbothered, unwilling to surrender its secrets. My return is not ceremonial. It is quiet, measured. There is no hum of fluorescent lights, no shuffle of curious onlookers, only the soft sigh of a hinge and the faint echo of an investigator stepping back into a place he once believed he understood. Her name surfaces first. Liora Pennet, age 27 at the time of the incident. A historian by training, a collector of local traces, a woman known for cataloging stories that others disregarded. Her name still spreads a cold hush through the archived files, printed in faded ink that trembles slightly along the edges. Her life ended in this small Washington outpost, a wooden rental cabin used occasionally by surveyors before it fell out of rotation. She had been alone, mapping regional documents for an independent project she never completed. The silence of her final hours has held for decades. I pull my gloves tighter. Even after all these years, entering the space feels like stepping into an unfinished sentence. The crime scene in memory. The interior forms itself slowly in the dim light. A desk against the far wall, its surface covered with a faint residue of paper dust. A narrow cot, mattress thinned by time. A window with a line of frost creeping across the glass. Nothing significant, nothing suggesting motive or cause. Yet when I first worked this case, I believed the scene told a clear story, simple, structured, unremarkable. Now it reads differently, almost cautious, as if the evidence arranged itself to be useful but not revealing. I kneel beside the desk. No yellow markers, no cordon tape, no chalk outlines. Only the honest remnants of a file once labeled unresolved in too many reports. My breath slows. This room is a ghost, and I am walking through its ribs. Her background surfaces. Liora grew up in a coastal town nearby, raised by a librarian mother who encouraged her early fascination with archived maps. According to the old notes, Liora had spent the better part of 2 years traveling across counties, pulling threads from forgotten administrative ledgers, land transfers, survey lines, registry updates, anything that hinted at old patterns. Her uniqueness wasn't glamorous. It was quiet. She paid attention to details that seemed insignificant to others. She left careful notes, sometimes too careful, pages filled with handwriting compact enough to squeeze entire references into margins. She had no known conflicts, no apparent risks, no reason to fear anything during that last winter trip. But she had been thorough, too thorough perhaps. Re-entering the scene. My footsteps carry the soft sound of disturbance, dust lifting briefly, then settling again. I stop near the desk and place a flat case on its surface. Inside are the digital replicas of every original photo, file, and interview associated with Liora's case. They feel heavier now than they ever did in paper form. The light from the small window drags across the room, forming pale rectangles on the floor. It's enough illumination to guide me, but not enough to warm anything. Cold air presses lightly against my jawline. I let the silence settle again. My fingertips rest near the drawer Liora used, I open it slowly. A soft creak, a breath of dust, a faint, dry scent of old wood. Inside lies nothing but a thin folder still bearing her initials written in quick strokes. LP, the handwriting looks almost like a whisper. I lift the folder carefully, as if the weight of the past could slip through the pages. There is no shock, no discovery yet, just the sense of stepping one pace deeper into a memory I once tried to understand. The first ghost, a photo. The first item is a small photograph, faded at the edges, a soft sepia tint, not intentional but born of age. Liora stands outdoors, smiling gently, one hand resting on a stack of journals. Behind her is a stretch of forest trail in Washington, tall pines leaning close as if listening. Her smile is not bright, not posed, just real. The kind that belongs to someone who found meaning in quiet work. This photo was taken 2 weeks before she last entered this cabin. I study it longer than I intend to. Something about the tilt of her head, the slight smudge on the lower corner where her thumb must have touched the surface, details that should feel trivial but do not. In the original investigation, this photo had no significance. It was simply a reference point. But the past is never neutral. It shifts when you return to it. The second ghost, a handwritten note. Beneath the photograph lies a small sheet of paper, folded once, then once more. Her handwriting stretches calmly across the page. Trail markers misplaced. Records inconsistent. Must check old county log. Something doesn't align. Back then, this was interpreted as academic frustration. A researcher noticing mundane errors. Now it reads differently. Almost like someone beginning to sense a pattern forming behind her work. I read it again, tracing the lines with my eyes, letting the ink settle into the quiet around me. Something doesn't align. The phrasing is simple, but here, in this dim room, it lands with weight. Fragments of dialogue. Old interviews echo faintly in memory. Did she seem concerned? I once asked a librarian who knew Liora well. A pause, a breath. She seemed thoughtful, not frightened, just deep in something. My own voice had been straightforward then, professional. What kind of something? I don't know, the librarian said. She didn't say, she never said things like that directly. Minimal, hesitant, more silence than clarity. I didn't interpret it as meaning anything more. Not then. Now the gaps feel louder. Rediscovering the evidence. I set the photo aside and sift through the rest of the folder. A carbon-smudged index card. A torn corner of a map. A receipt from a small diner where she had eaten the day before traveling here. Details that once felt peripheral. But I'm not searching for what mattered then. I'm searching for what we might have missed. Another slip of paper appears, this one faintly creased, possibly from her coat pocket. The ink is lighter, written quickly. Ask county office about the transfer list. Missing file, check again Monday. Transfer list. Missing file. Monday. She never made it to Monday. The investigator's inner silence. I stand up, letting the room settle again. The weight of those words presses against a thought I haven't formed yet. Something small, something faint. A thin thread of logic I can't grip fully but can sense in the air. My hands pause over the desk surface. I remember my first visit, how I stepped around the room too quickly, how I misread silence as emptiness rather than information. I let my breath fall softly. The smell of dust forms a thin veil. The coldness clings to the edges of my coat. There is a human presence here still, not physical but residual. The space remembers her even if the records tried not to. A file that should not exist. I open another section of the folder. A thin document sits near the top. At first glance, it appears to be a duplicate of something already archived years ago. A land transfer form from early 1973. But the date list is odd. The form in the official archive was dated March 21st. This one is dated March 19th. 2 days apart. 2 forms. One marked received. This one marked reviewed. I stare at the paper, not dramatic, not sensational, but meaningful. Paperwork rarely diverges without reason. A faint chill moves through my chest. Not fear, not dread, just the quiet shift that happens when logic wakes. Why did 2 versions exist? Why was one archived and one not? And why was Liora examining land transfer lists during the final week of her project? A small, devastating twist lives somewhere inside this paper, but it hasn't revealed itself yet. Not fully. A statement that fractures the silence. I place the transfer file down and pick up the last item in the folder. An incomplete statement from a county clerk whom we interviewed after the initial investigation. The transcript had always seemed dull, procedural, but now, in this muted space, it hums with a different frequency. She asked about a file that wasn't in our drawer. I told her maybe it was misfiled. She didn't look startled, only thoughtful. She asked when it would be updated. I said Monday morning. Monday again. Liora had planned to return here after speaking with the office. She had, according to the old notes, been calm during that conversation. But she never reached the next step. The statement continues. She said she found something odd in the mapping numbers. I didn't understand what she meant. She had a way of seeing things we didn't. A way of seeing things we didn't. That description strikes harder now, not sentimental, just accurate. She noticed small things, things easy to dismiss, things that matter only when someone revisits them decades later with a different set of questions. I fold the transcript gently. The silence around me thickens, pulling the past closer. The weight of guilt. The guilt isn't loud. It is steady, a slow ache held somewhere near the ribs. I wasn't responsible for the delay, but I was part of the team that accepted an incomplete picture. I let the room appear ordinary. I let the folder seem routine. Some cases do not fail because of chaos. They fail because of stillness, details left untouched, questions not asked twice. My hand rests on the desk again. The wood is cool, smooth, almost polished by age. I imagine Liora standing here, sorting her notes, aligning her maps, writing small observations no one else would ever see. The room holds her final hours like pressed leaves in a book. A subtle clue emerges. I return to the transfer form. 2 dates, 2 versions, one archived, one forgotten. I study the corner of the older document. A small imprint remains, subtle, almost invisible. A mark left by something resting on top of it years ago. Not a pen, not a staple. A smaller square shape. A photograph. A card. Something Liora placed there while comparing the 2 forms. The imprint sits exactly where the numbers differ between the documents. Such a tiny detail, such an easy one to ignore. Yet it feels like the first true step toward understanding. Not dramatic, not loud. Just logical. A discrepancy measured not in events, but in inches of paper. An unfinished realization. I let out a slow breath, the air mixing with the cold around me. My reflection blurs faintly in the frosted window. Beyond it, the forest stands silent, branches unmoved by anything except passing time. The past has begun to shift. A small hinge has turned. but the door it leads to is still mostly closed. I gather the items carefully, the photo, the notes, the two forms. None of them speak loudly, none of them shout answers. But they hum. Faintly, persistently. Logic has begun to move. Justice, even in its mechanical form, feels possible again. But something human lingers here too, her quiet persistence, her unfinished trail of thought. Something remains unresolved, and perhaps always will. The room exhales softly as I close the folder. The investigation has only just begun. The cabin absorbs sound the way old forests absorb wind, slowly, almost reluctantly. When I return from the car with the larger archive box, the floorboards respond with a muted groan, as if acknowledging the weight of things I once failed to understand. Dust rises again in thin, colorless sheets, drifting toward the small window where the light has begun shifting toward early evening. Nothing here feels alive except the questions. Liora Pennet's file rests on the desk. The bare wood looks stripped of time, as though the years since 1973 have passed through it without leaving a mark. I set the archive box down and open it carefully. Inside are dozens of records, notes, and photographs from the original investigation, material arranged with procedural neatness, but lacking the insight that comes only with distance. For a moment I allow myself stillness, then I begin. The overlooked ledger. The first item inside the box is a county ledger photocopy. It's a compilation of land transactions from 1972 through early 1973. The pages are coarse, the print grainy, the columns misaligned. This ledger was one of the things Liora had examined before making her final trip. Back then, this had seemed unremarkable, just another document in a stack of references. Now it feels central. I run my finger slowly across the lines of recorded transfers. Most entries follow predictable patterns: parcel numbers, signatures, schedule stamps. The inconsistencies are subtle, almost invisible unless someone is looking for them. But she was. I compare the ledger with the transfer form dated March 19th, the one not officially archived. A faint tension builds behind my sternum. The numbers on the ledger align with this unfiled version, not the one placed in the county archive 2 days later. This is not dramatic. This is not sensational. This is deliberate inconsistency. Liora saw it, and she wrote, "Something doesn't align." The room grows quieter, as if the air itself has leaned closer. A mistake or a replacement. The two versions of the transfer document sit side by side on the desk. March 19th, March 21st, reviewed, received, such minor differences, the kind easily dismissed as clerical adjustments. But only one went into the official record. The other was left to decay inside her personal folder. I study the line near the bottom, parcel 14B7. The numbers match perfectly between the ledger and the unfiled March 19th form, but on the archived official version, the parcel number shifts one digit, not dramatically, not enough to draw attention. A small change, but a precise one. I speak softly, almost inaudible. "Why?" My voice disappears into the room, swallowed by the wood, the dust, the air too cold to carry sound far. This is not a coincidence. Clerical errors rarely alter things that precisely. Something or someone adjusted the record. Liora tried to trace it. On paper, she tried to follow the logic. She cataloged everything she saw, but she didn't live long enough to take the next step. My breath releases slowly. This is the first clear fracture in the silence. The interview that never resolved anything. I retrieve an old transcript from the box, An interview with the surveyor who had used the cabin before it fell into disuse. His voice, captured on an aging recorder decades ago, had been tense but controlled. I remember some documents being shuffled around that year. Things moved from one drawer to another. I thought it was just routine. At the time, I accepted that. Routine happens. Offices reorganize, papers shift. But his next lines feel different now. When she asked for the older lists, I told her they were somewhere in the back room, maybe misfiled. She said she'd look at them Monday. There was always a pause here in the recording, a quiet space between his memory and the next words. But we never questioned that silence, not deeply enough. "I didn't see her again," he eventually said. Those words feel heavier now. Not dramatic. Just final. A map with light marks. I spread Liora's field map across the desk. It unfurls reluctantly, the creases stiff with age. On the surface, tiny pencil marks dot a region north of the cabin, barely visible unless the light hits them at the correct angle. These marks weren't flagged during the original investigation. They were dismissed as routine directional notes. But the marks form a subtle pattern, a line that traces the boundary where parcel 14B7 should have been. My hands rest lightly on the edge of the paper. The cool texture presses against my palms. She'd traced the discrepancy physically, not just in documents. She had been trying to understand why the official boundary shifted slightly between versions of the file. The difference is small, just a fraction of an acre, too insignificant to matter to most people. But small things accumulate meaning when someone notices them. A memory from 1973. I close my eyes for a moment. Memory moves through me like a slow current. I remember standing here as a younger investigator. I remember the sting of cold seeping through my coat. I remember asking routine questions, convinced the case was straightforward, an accidental incident at a remote cabin. No signs of struggle, no signs of interference, just quiet tragedy. Back then, I treated the room with procedural detachment. I didn't see its tension, its held breath. I didn't see how meticulous her work was, how she left clues not through intention but through habit. Now, decades later, I see the pattern forming. Slowly, quietly, logically. A second photo, unlabeled. At the bottom of the archive box lies a small envelope. I open it carefully. Another photograph slides out. It shows the county office from that era, an unassuming building, white wooden panels, a single door with a narrow window. The edges of the photo are slightly curled, and a faint shadow appears across the bottom. Someone stands inside the building behind the glass, partially obscured. The figure is difficult to identify, no facial clarity, no defining features. Just the silhouette of someone watching the camera. This photo was never cataloged as evidence. It was found among her items, but no one questioned why she had taken it. Why would Liora photograph the county office from that angle? Why would she capture someone inside? My chest tightens, not from fear, from recognition, a quiet, steady realization forming at the edges of thought. Liora was documenting inconsistencies, not just in paper, in people. The cabin's unspoken archive. I walk toward the back corner of the room where a narrow shelf remains attached to the wall. The wood is thin, nearly fragile. Only a few old nails keep it in place. On this shelf, during the original investigation, we found nothing relevant. But dust covers everything now, thick and unmoved. Except for a faint rectangle, a clean patch, the shape of a small book or folder that once rested there for years before being removed. I run a gloved finger along the outline. Someone returned here after the original investigation. Not recently, no signs of fresh disturbance. But at some point after 1973 and before the cabin was sealed, something had been taken. Not by Liora. Not by us. By someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. I exhale slowly. The realization settles deep. She had a missing file. Someone else knew she did. Someone came back for it. This is logic, not speculation. The physical outline is undeniable. A rectangular space on a dusty shelf does not clear itself. The unfiled note. Inside the box, beneath older reports, lies a note I barely remember collecting decades ago. It's written on the back of a diner receipt, a familiar pattern for Liora, who wrote wherever she could. This one says, "Ask clerk again, discrepancy too precise, not error." Those last two words strike with clarity. Not error. She knew, quietly, logically, without dramatics. And she would have followed the thread. Monday morning, she would have returned to the county office, asked new questions, requested the older records again. Someone knew. Someone intercepted the missing file from this shelf before anyone else could. And someone made sure she never arrived at the next step. My hands remain still on the note. The paper trembles faintly, no wind, no draft, just my pulse moving through the memory. A fragment in the closet. I open the small closet near the door. Most of the space is empty, only a few rusted nails embedded in the wooden beam. But tucked into the corner lies something brittle and pale. A torn piece of paper. I lift it with careful fingers. It matches the texture of her field notebook, a margin fragment, a line of broken handwriting curls across it. Transfer update came earlier then. Then what? Then expected. Then scheduled. Then allowed. The rest is missing. The small fragment feels like a breath caught mid-sentence. I stand in the closet doorway, letting the implication form carefully, without rushing. If the transfer update came earlier than expected, someone altered the timeline. Someone replaced the official record before the update cycle. Someone made sure the incorrect version became the permanent one. This is not coincidence. This is structure. Reconstructing the logic. I return to the desk and spread everything out. The ledger. The two transfer forms. The map. Her notes. The unidentified folder. The fragment from the closet. Individually they are quiet, collectively they echo. Parcel 14B7 shifted slightly. The official record replaced the accurate one. Someone removed a folder from this cabin. Liora photographed the office. Someone stood behind the door when she did. She wrote that the discrepancy was too precise. And the missing file was never located. The twist is forming, not dramatic, not loud, but inevitable. Parcel 14B7 was not just land. It was a boundary. A boundary that could change ownership right subtly if the number shifted. A boundary that could move value. A boundary someone wanted adjusted. And when Liora traced it physically, they noticed her noticing. Logic settles in with a quiet certainty. She found something true. Something small. Something dangerous. The human weight of realization. I sit down slowly, letting the chair take my weight. My breath falls evenly, but something inside resists calm. Justice has the rhythm of cold machinery, but understanding always carries a human tone. My guilt is not a sharp feeling. It is slow, diffused, like mist clinging to the edges of memory. I failed to see the logic she left behind. I walked through this room decades ago believing the silence was emptiness, not a message. Now the evidence speaks again, not in sentences but in alignment. This case was never about violence or chaos. It was about precision, about a change no one else would notice, about a person who paid attention. The twist is not a revelation. The twist is a correction, a quiet, logical correction of the past. Liora died because she noticed a boundary shift. Not dramatic, just true. Evening settles in. The room dims further as the sun lowers behind the tree line. Shadows stretch across the floor, long and thin, like lines on a map. The cold deepens around my hands. I gather the documents again, stacking them in an order that mirrors Liora's thinking. The past has begun to clarify, but not resolve. Justice may still be mechanical. But something human remains here, in the careful lines she drew, in her note fragments, in the small photograph where her thumb touched the corner. I trace that faint imprint again. Liora saw something simple. And simplicity, when true, is rarely safe. Night gathers around the cabin like a slow-moving tide, touching the walls with muted gray. The air turns still again, as if waiting for a conclusion I am not yet ready to form. The documents on the desk curl slightly at the edges, responding to the temperature drop. The forest outside offers no movement, no murmurs, only a patient silence that feels older than the decade in question. This is the final stretch where accumulated fragments must form structure, not through assumption, not through imagination, through alignment. I place my hand lightly on the edge of Liora Pennet's folder and let the present settle around me. The past is close now, not as memory but as pattern. Reconstructing her last hours. To understand her work, I need to follow her path chronologically, step by methodical step. Liora arrived in this cabin on a Thursday afternoon. She intended to stay 3 days. By Friday evening, she had already mapped half of the regional boundary discrepancies she had noted in the ledger. Saturday morning, she visited the county office. The clerk confirmed an older file was missing. She made notes. She took the photograph, the one with the silhouette behind the door. Then she returned to the cabin. Her own notes indicate she identified the discrepancy that afternoon, the precise shift in parcel 14B7. She began comparing the earlier forms to the archived ones. By evening, she wrote, "Not error." That was her final complete entry. Sunday morning arrives, but the official record never captured her movements for that day. The last witness to see her was the diner staff, when she picked up a coffee and returned to her rented vehicle. After that, the timeline dissolves into gaps. No dramatic disturbance, no abrupt 911 call, no visible struggle, only absence. An absence now shaped by evidence that finally makes sense. Walking through her process. I take out her field notebook, the one with the missing fragment. Its pages feel soft, worn from years of storage. I turn the pages slowly, listening to the dry whisper of paper. Her notes are calm, organized, structured. Each entry is dated, timed, cross-referenced. Her handwriting never wavers. On the page before the torn fragment, she wrote, "Boundary moved, purpose unclear, confirm with older list." On the page after the missing section, she wrote only one word, "Later," and below it a question mark. The position of the torn page indicates that whatever she wrote in that missing section came to her suddenly. Perhaps a realization, perhaps a detail she feared losing before she could compare it to the documents. The torn edge suggests she removed the page deliberately, intending to bring it with her. The missing rectangular outline on the cabin shelf supports that something was placed there afterward, something taken later by someone else. The logic is simple. She kept the torn note with her. Someone retrieved it later. Someone who knew she had noticed the discrepancy. The county office revisited. I look again at the photograph taken outside the county office. The silhouette behind the door is static, blurred, but the angle of the shadow suggests someone standing very close to the glass, watching her without stepping outside. Not threatening, not approaching, just observing her presence, keeping track. Back then in 1973, we interpreted this photo as irrelevant, a stray image, a researcher's snapshot, nothing more. Now it becomes something different, a timestamp of awareness, a moment where someone inside the office noticed her noticing. It aligns with the timeline. It aligns with the discrepancy. It aligns with the later removal of the missing file. Small details, quiet details, nothing sensational. But true. The boundary shift explained. Parcel 14B7 was not large. Its value was modest. The shift in boundaries between the two forms would not have altered population counts or maps in any significant way. But it did change the recorded ownership by a small margin, barely measurable but present, enough to adjust a claim by a few feet, enough to settle a long-standing administrative confusion in someone's favor. Liora recognized the pattern. The official transfer list was updated earlier than normal. Someone replaced the accurate form with a subtly altered one. Someone with access to the backroom files. Someone who noticed her questions. No confrontation, no dramatic event, just a quiet divergence in documents. A change made with precision and left undetected for decades. The logic is now complete. Returning to the shelf. I stand and approach the shelf again, feeling the boards lightly give under my steps. The rectangular outline is unmistakable. Even now, after decades, it remains clean, untouched by the thick layer of dust covering the rest of the cabin. I crouch, letting my eyes follow the outline. The width matches her field notebook. The height matches a small folder, something slender, something she would have placed there while working. Her routine suggests she stored items she needed quick access to in elevated or visible spaces. That shelf would have been in her sightline whenever she turned from the desk. The missing object is not just a clue. It is the logical center of her timeline. Whatever was once placed there held the torn fragment and the older transfer form. When the cabin was cleared for the initial investigation, none of those items were found. Which means the removal occurred after her discovery and before we examined the room. The door had no signs of forced entry, no disturbances inside, no displaced dust except the missing outline. Someone with a key. Someone familiar with the office and the cabin. Someone who knew the timeline of her visits. I lean back slightly, letting the air settle. Not dramatic, just precise. A long-awaited realization. As the pieces align, my reflection forms faintly in the dark window, a silhouette against the soft interior light. The cold defines the edges of the room, but the clarity warms my chest in a quiet, steady way. The truth is simple. Liora found a discrepancy. Someone noticed. Someone removed the missing file. Her final hours remained undocumented because they were ordinary. No alarms, no shock, no sudden event. Only a silence that we misinterpreted for decades. The logic leads to one conclusion. She saw something someone preferred to keep still. Not harmful, not chaotic. Just inconvenient. The clerk's second interview. I pull out the later interview we conducted decades after the event. At the time, we thought the clerk had retired quietly, offering routine answers. The interview reads, "She asked questions that didn't seem important at the time, but she always wrote everything down. I remember she took a photo and left with a list she copied by hand." Later in the transcript, "There was a gap in our records that year. Things moved around. Not sure why. Maybe we were reorganizing. It was a long time ago." The clerk didn't admit to anything improper, but the tone of the interview contains hesitations, pauses where his voice softened or trailed. Not deceitful, just careful. At this late stage, no one is accused, no one is implicated. The clerk's era is long past. The people involved, if any, may no longer be here to answer questions. And yet, the logic holds without requiring accusation. Liora discovered a boundary shift someone quietly adjusted. She documented it. Someone retrieved the evidence after she left. The rest became silence. The human echo. I gather the documents one last time. The edges brush softly against my gloves. Each page carries a memory, not of an event, but of a person who noticed the smallest details with persistence. Liora's story is not one of noise or spectacle. It is one of patience, someone willing to follow numbers, lines, and transfers until they aligned. And when they didn't align, she wrote, "Not error." She wasn't seeking trouble. She wasn't confronting anyone. She wasn't unveiling anything dramatic. She was simply doing the work she had always done, quietly, carefully, honestly. The forest outside has darkened fully now, leaving the cabin wrapped in stillness. My breath forms a faint cloud as I exhale. There's a weight in the air, but not heaviness, more like acknowledgement. She wasn't forgotten, only paused, and now resumed. The final twist, a modest truth. With all documents in order, the twist reveals itself not as shock but as accuracy. Liora solved her own case. She uncovered the truth in 1973. Her notes provided the path, and everything else eventually aligned. The mistake was ours, interpreting her silence as absence instead of meaning. For years the case remained untouched because we assumed nothing small could matter. But small things often explain everything. A single digit on a parcel number. A slightly advanced date on a document. A missing file. A photograph taken at the precise moment someone watched through the door. She saw the pattern. We simply arrived too late. An unresolved reflection. I close her folder gently. The latch clicks softly, a sound almost respectful. The room grows still again. Dust drifts, settling slowly across the old floorboards. This case will enter the archives now with clarity. The discrepancy she found will be corrected. The administrative history of Parcel 14B7 will be amended. A footnote will describe the shift and the delayed discovery. But closure is mechanical. Understanding is human. The cabin remains quiet. The shelf remains marked by absence. Outside, the forest holds its own breath. I step toward the door but pause once more, letting the silence settle over the documents, over the desk, over the memory of a woman who noticed something small and true. Justice may be procedural, but memory, real memory, is something else. It lingers. It waits. It returns when the past asks for attention. And sometimes, all it takes is a room like this, dim, forgotten, frozen in time, to remind us that truth rarely disappears. It simply rests until someone listens.